Hello, friends. Today we have Gresham Harkless. Fantastic guy. Great interview. Really enjoyed talking to him. He's done 1,600 podcasts with all sorts of different, really high level CEOs of great companies. So he condensed a lot of that wisdom down that he's been able to attain into a digestible 90 minutes or so. If you like this podcast, share it with your friends, share it with your family, give it to somebody who you think might find value for it. Go into YouTube, give us a follow, subscribe, like, appreciate all those things. Comment on our videos if you feel like they've been helpful to you. Those kind words, they mean a lot for us. They keep us going and putting out this content. And then last but not least, if you don't mind, go onto whatever platform that you choose to use your podcasting on and leave us 5 stars. Thank you very much, everybody. Talk soon. Gresham, what's happening, brother?
Nothing much. How's it going, Alex?
Fantastic. I was just telling you, 10-year in business anniversary this weekend. So we were doing a little bit of celebrating, enjoying the beautiful weather, getting out there golfing. I'm not a golfer, but we did it anyways. But yeah, man, this is kind of my relaxation here now that I can do the podcast.
Yeah, podcast is a beautiful thing when you get the opportunity to talk with people, learn from people's stories and everything like that. And congratulations, happy 10 years too.
Thank you, man. Well, I know you're a busy fella and you got a lot going on, but why don't you give us a little bit about yourself? Tell us who you are, what you've been up to over the last little bit. And then I definitely want to go back, man. I was reading your bio and it was making me tired.
Yes, I'm very much so a busybody. People have other terms for that, but I just basically say busybody. So I'm Gresh. I'm from the DC area. Been here pretty much since I can remember, since I was about 5 or so. My dad was in the military, so we didn't actually travel around too much. But one of the things that I started to realize, I was that kid that sold potato chips on the playground, and did a bunch of those quote unquote entrepreneurial things. A lot of times I was just kind of copying what other people were doing. But one unique thing that I did, that kind of I think planted a seed for everything that I do now is my dad was in the military. So he got an assignment to go to an entirely different country for a year. I was 10 years old. We had just moved. And that was like, I'm an only child. So that was like my partner. So my dad, but also like my big brother, the one that would beat me in all the sports and all those things, that he was going away for a year. So I booed, like cried like a baby. And of course he was serving his country, but of course we wanted him, at home. So one of the things I started at that time, was a family newspaper. And that family newspaper was a way that, this is pre Skype, FaceTime, Zoom, all these kind of snazzy tools we have to instantly connect with people. It was my way to kind of connect with my dad. So we had AOL Instant Messenger. We would chat with him and do all those things. And I started to compile this family newspaper, which was simply just Microsoft Word, some clip art, some stories that were going on in our family. I always joke and say, like, envision like a TMZ for your family about all the things that are going on. From someone who was gonna get married and didn't get married to a squirrel that got into my grandma's house. Just all these things I would cover. And we basically would put that into a care package. We would send monthly to my dad. And then he would find out about all the things that were going on. Of course, get his honey buns, oatmeal cream pies, all those awesome things that he wanted to. And I sold some of the subscriptions to the family members close to the family. And the reason I usually bring that up, I did a lot of different things. Graduated from undergrad at Howard, got my master's from Georgetown, bounced around to a bunch of different jobs. But whenever I went through like this time period of like, what do I want to be? Like, who am I? Things like that, and ask those questions. I put that through the filter of like 10-year-old Gresh. And I would say, like, I felt like that was a unique enough story that I felt like it wasn't just me copying other people. It was something that was a part of me. So anytime I thought about doing something, I would say, hey, what would 10-year-old Gresh do? And to be honest, I still ask that question now to kind of like reroute me into who I am and what I want to be. So that's just a light touch on like kind of who I am. Yeah, what kind of got me started.
That's fascinating. I heard another business owner, entrepreneur say a very similar quote, like, what would your childhood self say about the thing that you're doing right now? And I think the unfortunate reality is that a lot of people's childhood self would be like, dude, you're like working in an office job. Like, That's not very cool. Like, we wanted to be an astronaut
Yeah.
or a professional soccer player, and
Yes.
you're, like, working in an office, you have to work 9 to 5? But that's difficult, right? It's difficult standard to live up to because you have such imagination, and when you're a child, anything is possible. But I love that story about you doing those care packages. I'm sure the other soldiers are like, "This is BS. Look at what, like, my kid is sending me. My kid's sending me these crappy handwritten notes, and my bunkmate has a whole newsletter revolving around him." Like, jeez.
Yeah.
So talk to me about, like, how you started to get involved into these various projects. Like, what did 10-year-old Gresh say that inspired you to do these various projects? Because you got, like, 10 things going on, my man.
Yeah, I juggle a few things and try to stay busy, to say the least. And yeah, I mean, for me, like when I came into undergrad, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. You know, you go through all those questions like, what does life look like? You know, what am I supposed to do for the rest of my lives? And I went back to that 10-year-old Gresh, and that's why I ended up being like an English major. So. But
Mm.
I've always been like a geek at heart. So I've always loved technology, loved all aspects of technology. So throughout college, I end up starting like a nonprofit with one of my buddies from high school, actually called Men of Character, where we help kids be prepared to go to college. We end up giving some scholarships away, things like that. And you know, I just always kind of tried out different things. It definitely wasn't a straight path, but I think I ended up going to get an internship my final year of college, and again, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to be, and I thought I was going to go to law school. So I ended up getting my master's in sports industry management because I said, "Hey, I love sports. I see this guy named Jerry Maguire. I hear about this guy named Drew Rosenhaus, and it's like that would be really cool to be a sports agent." And I remember sitting in that class, the very first class, my master's, and it's like I don't know why I did this. I was already like burnt out. I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I powered through, finished that program. It's a really cool program, by the way. Got to learn from people from Under Armour because Under Armour is based in the DC area, which is
Mm.
really cool in and of itself. But still didn't really find like what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be, and things like that. So I ended up getting a position with the post office, actually doing outside sales, and that was like my first job out of school. And I remember going through, and there was a person, like a lot of people at the post office, you get a job, you stay there for like until they kind of will you out.
Yeah.
And I remember that we had like a celebration for somebody that had done like 60 years or 50, 60 years at the post office. And I remember one of my coworkers, it was four of us that were brought in. It was like, Gresh, that's going to be you.
Oh, that's like the worst thing that you could
Exact
say to somebody. That's like
exactly.
telling a woman she's gonna look like her mother. You're just like, "Be careful what you just say," right there.
Exactly, choose your words wisely,
Yeah,
and,
right.
just that and a couple other things, it's like, "Hey, I still have this entrepreneurial bug, I don't know what that looks like and what I'm gonna do, but I know that this where I'm at isn't it." And, I did a challenging thing, so I was bold and I said, I'm going to leave this job. I'm going to, try to do what I want to do. At that time, I was moving back home anyways. And I was between like, should I buy a place? Should I move back home? So I said, you know what? I'm just going to go try to do something bold. I'm really big into entrepreneurship and starting a business and things like that. So I said I was going to do some freelance writing. So I had a bunch of little like side things that I was going to do. Freelance writing was going to be one of the main things that I ended up doing. Went back home, started doing freelance writing, put in my resignation from the job. And I said, one thing that I know that I've read about is you want to be mentally strong and physically strong and healthy, like when you're running your business. So started doing all those things, went and started to play basketball again because I played basketball in high school. And I ended up tearing my Achilles tendon the very first
Mm.
time I went out. Didn't tear it completely, but tore it enough to where it hurt a lot. And that was about 15 or so days after my insurance ended with the position that I left.
Mm.
So, needless to say, it didn't go the way that I wanted to go. Actually, put me in probably like honestly a dark place because I wasn't really happy because I had done something bold. I did what all the people say is you want something, go for it, do the bold thing. All those motivational videos, I was consuming it all and I tried to do it all, and I found myself stuck in bed. So But funny enough, like around that time, because I was doing a lot of freelance writing, I ended up starting a blog. That blog ended up being around entrepreneurship and business, hearing like why people started their business, how they started the business, advice, things like that. And that really planted the seed for, CO Blog Nation, which eventually became the podcast blog and all of that. Had I not tore my Achilles tendon, I always say I'm hard-headed enough that I probably wouldn't have ever, stopped and actually done something like that. I would have been still trying to
Mm.
freelance, right? In the way that I had. And, that led to one thing led to, me starting the digital marketing business. And that's kind of what led me to where I am now.
That's fascinating. That's kind of like life slapping you in the face and like, oh, you want to be an entrepreneur? You want to start a business somewhere? Like, watch this. What's the
Yeah,
joke? Like, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Um,
exactly.
but I want to drill down on something because you sound a lot like me. One of the things that I think separates me from a lot of people, I'm not saying I'm better than people, but something that I have somewhere and I don't know where it came from was just this internal idea that like, hey, we're gonna do it. Like, we're not just gonna talk about like starting a blog, like we're gonna actually do it. And so many people that I've been around, like I went to school for entrepreneurship. So like if you think that there's going to be a group of people out there that absolutely positively are going to start a business, like this is the group that you're gonna bet on, right? But I don't know what the stats are. Maybe like 25% of those kids started a business. So I was always just thinking to myself, like, well, what separates me from them? It really wasn't that I was smarter or honestly, even I had a better business idea. It's just like I actually did it. And, this podcast, like a lot of people in my office, they're like, oh, dude, we should like start a YouTube channel. Like, we should, like, they're big metal fans. They're like, we should start like a metal podcast, like a metal channel. And I'm like, do it. That sounds cool. Like, go for it. That's not a conflict of interest to me at the company. Like, do it. Awesome. I'm excited for you. But not to say they're bad people, they just haven't really like had the follow through. It's one of those things where everybody has a business idea and that's not the interesting thing. It's like the follow through to actually like, okay, I have the idea. I'm filing the paperwork. I'm paying for the LLC incorporation. I'm getting the bank account set up. Like, there's so many steps that most people don't get past step one to ever get to step, 10,000 that Elon's on, where he's like, I have 12 companies that have raised $1 billion each. And right. So you got to do the little things first. But where do you think that just like get up and go comes from?
That is a great question, Alex. And I'm honestly not sure because it's so funny because I came from, I feel like a family that had a lot of ideas around starting businesses and stuff like that. And I think I ended up talking with a coach at one point, and a lot of times I was like, I'm really big into like, hey, we have all this talent as a family. Let's get together. Let's do these things. And it always felt like I was pulling teeth. Like no one ever wanted to take that leap. And I don't really know like where that came from because a lot of times you would say like, oh, if you saw like we're around entrepreneurship, you really start to realize like that becomes your reality. But for me, it's just I think I started to understand at a maybe a fairly younger age of this like feeling around fear and what fear was and how it can sometimes debilitate you from even taking action.
Mm,
So many times we have ideas and there's things that are, that we hope to do, but we don't ever do them for a reason. So I even remember around school, like I really wanted to get to the point where I didn't let fear affect me to the point that I didn't try. I
mm,
maybe didn't always like get to where I wanted to be. And like I mentioned, like tearing my Achilles, sometimes things did not go the way that I wanted to go, but it was never as bad as I thought it would be. And I
yes.
think once you fail and you sometimes even embarrass yourself, and you realize it's not as bad as you think it is, I think that ends up becoming part of your superpower. So, like, I went skydiving, for example, because I was afraid of heights. I
Mm,
did public speaking when I was a freshman in school because I didn't like speaking in front of people. But I started to realize, like, all those things were kind of maybe more in my head than anything else. And I just would constantly do those things. And starting a business, like I remember when I first started, I said, I'm going skydiving again because that's where I compared it to is just like jumping out and doing those things. So I think so many people like they don't have that association or that relationship with fear. And I think that sometimes, when you're young, usually you don't even know, you're just trying to things. But I think when you get older, when you get jaded by life, you get sometimes punched in the face a few times, tear a few Achilles, maybe even. he started saying, "Hey, that's not really what I want to do because I have all these things to take care of." So I said, "Hey, I'm young now. Let me just try to go for it. If I don't make it, then the worst pain is not in failing; it's actually in regret." And I never wanted to carry that regret as much as I could.
Well, hopefully you don't have to tear a few Achilles, like,
Yeah,
let's just
exactly.
point 5, if you wanna call it 1, that's fine, let's just
Yeah.
leave it there. Something you hit on there, that's why I started my first company in college. I actually got a pass out, like a pamphlet from my professor, and it was all the reasons to start a business while in college.
Mhm.
It was super counterintuitive because you're thinking to yourself, like, college, like, wrong place, wrong time, like, I don't have any money, like, I don't have any know-how, like, who am I gonna sell to? Like, well, what if it doesn't work out? But those were all the reasons exactly why you should start a business because, like, you don't have any money. You have no money to lose. Like,
Yes.
you don't have any responsibilities right now other than, getting your grades, which they weren't crazy difficult for me
Sure.
in the business world. You don't have, like, any know-how. Yeah, but you have, like, a campus of advisors all around you who just wanna give you free advice, like, the accountants, the lawyers, the stock people, the graphic designers, they all just wanna give you advice. And, "Oh, like, who's my captive audience?" It's like, the college kids are your captive audience. They're right there in front of you. And
Yes.
if it doesn't work, you're 21 years old and you didn't have any money before, so now you don't have any money again. You're back where you started. You're not, like, married with 3 kids and a wife and a mortgage and a boat, and you're like, "Oh, like, the business really has to work or else they're gonna take the boat." Like, no, you can just knock the dust off your boots and be like, "Alright, we're gonna get back up." Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's why I started my business. And to your point, I think fear, it kind of starts at that, like, I don't even wanna run towards it. Then you do the skydiving, you're like, "Okay, it wasn't that bad." And then I think sort of the final evolution I've heard people talk about is when you're like, "Oh, I'm afraid of something. Shit, that means I know I have to do it." Because it's like, "Oh, I gotta try to overcome that thing." I mean, that's what I just heard Joe Rogan talking about. He was like, "I was afraid to do this live Netflix comedy special," but then he's like, that means that I have to do it because, like, I don't want to allow fear to win out in my life." And I think that's just a slow exposure therapy type thing to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then honestly, it's that muscle too. When you continue to kind of flex and work that out, you continue to kind of have. I think fear never goes away, but you just start to I think have a different relationship with it. And when you have that different relationship, you're like, okay, well, this is the next thing. So I'm flexing that muscle even more. I maybe need to try those things. And then I think too, when those things don't go the way that you want them to go, they end up being like really strong lessons. And that's one of the biggest things I learned from way smarter people than myself is that even the people that quote unquote fail. I was listening. One of my favorite quotes around failure is who started Sarah Blakely, who started Spanx. She talked around
That's my
her,
girl. That's my
yeah,
girl, man. I love her. She's
amazing,
amazing story.
amazing entrepreneur. And then like even like hearing how she was raised, like how her dad used to ask her not how she succeeded every day, what wins did she? He asked her how she failed every day, and she said that
Mhm.
made her change how she looked at failure. Failure wasn't final, failure was learning. And so like as you said so well, like when you're on a college campus or even if you have 3 kids, you don't have 4 kids, so maybe this time right now is better than the time it will be later on when the stakes get higher and higher. So what better way to kind of fail lower stakes so that you can kind of learn and get better, because that's how I think people really get great at anything, especially like entrepreneurship and business. But it's not by doing all the things right and hitting a home run or grand slam when you step up to the plate. It's a lot of times by striking out, tweaking, and then you have a little bit more of a formula on how to get better.
Yeah, I'm actually looking for this research, but there is new research out now where these neuroscientists they honed in on this specific region in the brain, and I don't know what it is or what it's called. I can't quite find that, but they essentially looked at that, and then they forced people to like make hard decisions. I don't know what it was. I think it was weight training, or maybe it was like a cold plunge or something, and they just forced them to do it over and over again. Then they had like a control group that didn't really do anything, and legitimately, this area of the brain can grow in size and it can be encouraged to like light up more on CT scans. So it to use the meathead analogy, it is a muscle and it will
Okay.
be grown. Like just like your biceps, if you train them, they'll get bigger. This area actually can get bigger and it becomes easier to overcome those things that are like, oh yeah, have the donut. I heard an interesting thing from Andrew Huberman. I think he said something like, I force myself to have 20 no's every day. Like, I'm sitting at my desk, I want to get up and use the bathroom. Nope. No. It's like one. And I want to have that donut. No. Two. Like, I want to stop writing. I'm like tired. Like three. And it's like a crazy small little thing, but I thought that was a fascinating way of thinking about it, that you're actually building that willpower muscle in the brain
Yeah,
so that at some point you can just keep dedicating yourself to things.
yeah, you know what's so funny? Like I've heard that around sales too. Like if you start to like realize what your sales ratio is, if you realize that you get 10 no's before you get a yes or 50 no's before you get a yes, whatever that is, when you look at it and kind of change your perception around it, it's not a no, it's like one less no that you need to get to a yes. So if you realize at
Mm,
50 times, you're going to get 49 no's, then you're going to get a yes. You want to get those no's as quickly as possible, get to no
right.
as quickly as possible, because that's going to get you closer to 50. And it's like when you start to understand that, you realize that it's just a path of the journey. I think that's one of the biggest like things that I have learned and I want to continue to try to remind myself of. And I even tell to people, it's just like when you truly understand what the journey is, especially around success, business, entrepreneurship, you understand it has those barriers, those pitfalls, all those things. You want to get to those a lot quicker, learn the lessons so that you can get ultimately to where you want to be.
Yeah, my friend Paul Salter just came on the podcast. He gave me Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way. That's like pretty much it. It's like the thing that is stopping you, that's the thing that you have to go after. So whether that's sales, like all those no's, you have to like not go after no's, but you have to like get through those no's to
Right.
continue on and get to the ultimate place where you want to be. So how do you transition from this blog into where you are now, like full-fledged media company, podcast, the CB Nation, which I know I was on it. I was scrolling around. I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many resources. I got to ask him where to even start.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and yeah, I always, I actually when I was in college, I was gonna try to become a journalism major because I've always been, really um, fascinated by journalism, the journalism industry. But I kind of chickened out. I became an English major, which is kind of adjacent, but a lot of it was I always feel like I've been a journalist at heart, so my approach has always been like if I want to do something, I want to quote unquote stand on the shoulders of giants. I want to learn from people that are doing it so I can get better. So when I was saying, hey, I have these entrepreneurial tendencies, not sure what to do, that's what led me to kind of the blog and the podcast and all those things. But the blog started out first, and I started to look at the journalism industry and I said, okay, this industry is kind of being, destroyed a little bit. I
Yep.
graduated in 2009. So a lot of things were changing and they still are. So I started to see that a lot of the people that had blogs or they may even, I think at that time wasn't even as big, a number of people that were doing podcasts. They were trying to find different ways that they could generate revenue outside of advertising. And one of the big ways was helping people out with certain services. A lot of people were doing like social media consulting. They were doing blogging for people. So me being the geek that I was, I had built. My mom ended up having like a side business at the time where she did embroidery. I built her website. I mentioned I had started a nonprofit. I even started a business my senior year of college where I did editing, like writing editing. But I had built all those websites. So I started to do that to try to
That's
generate some
pretty
revenue.
early in the website world. Like for those listening, I think I started mixed nutrition in 2014, and that was not like Shopify rolled the website out, just like here it is. Like you get a graphic designer to make you some pictures, and it's out there. So give yourself some credit there, because I know what that was like back then.
Yeah, that was 2010, 2000, yeah, 2009, 2010. That around that time, that's when, those things kind of came up. But yeah, I've always liked to tinker into stuff. So while I'm doing this blog, I'm like, okay, like how do you monetize this? How do you work on those things? And of course you look at different things, but I started to, talk to people that kind of showed me more than I knew that it was something like, they didn't know how to build websites. Like I think a lot of times when you have things that you do on a regular basis, you don't realize it could be a business. You don't realize it's even of value to other people until you start
Hmm.
having those conversations. And so like over a period of time, it's pretty much like, hey, you know how to do this. Can you do this? I'll pay you for it. I'm like, you would pay me for it. And doing that, kind of very much so freelance, eventually led me to And while I did that, I was also holding different jobs. So I was kind of moonlighting and doing that. Um, had a job that was one of my favorite jobs where I would work with kids. I would run sports camps all across like Northern Virginia. Um,
Basketball?
Basketball, football. I mean, these are 2 to 5 year olds. So
Mm.
for a lot of them, it's just the coordination, just trying to get them to stand up straight. So I would walk in with a big inflatable Mr. Football, Mr. Baseball, and have the kids, throw the baseball or football into, the center and things like that, and clap and cheer and all those things. Best job ever, no question. I was like Disneyland dad. I would come once a week and get to do that at different schools and just get to have fun with the kids. But I did that. Loved the job, but I didn't feel like it was stable. So I left that job, took a job at Yellow Book, which had changed their branding to Haibu. And I also had two bosses that left in the in the span of about 3 weeks between when I was training, I got hired, and actually being out in the office and out in the kind of the sales space. And that was like, okay, this isn't stable either. So I was like, hey, if I'm going to do something, I might as well enjoy what I'm doing. If I'm going to go down with the plane, I might as well like what I'm doing when I'm going down with the plane. So I went
Yeah.
back to working with the kids, and lo and behold, got laid off 3 weeks later.
Mm. Well,
um
people always tell you, "Oh, starting a business, that's super risky, man." You're like, "Dude, I've been at jobs that are risky, brother."
exactly. And when that happened, I was kind of mad at myself again, because I was like, you know what, you didn't pay attention to what you knew, and then you went back. And I knew it, because I knew it was going to happen. Like literally when I got the phone call that, hey, we need to meet, because they were in a different state, I knew what was happening. So it's kind of like not listening to that small voice. But while all that's happening, I got laid off. I ended up finding one more position before I started my business. But when I found that position, the light switch had already been, it changed. Everything had changed. My mentality was different. I didn't want to be in that position again, because I said, hey, it's just me now. But what if I had wife, kids, house, like all those? I never want to be in that position. So I want to try to, bet on myself. So that's when I met somebody from a networking group. I'd still been doing the website design, the SEO at the time. And again, I didn't see it of any value. I used to just use it as a way to get in the door. And somebody from a networking event, and there was a couple people that brought me in and said, hey, we would pay you to do this, and kind of like bet on me to really start doing this seriously. And that was, 11 years ago, that I did that. And, I just been kind of humming along ever since. But I think that period when I got laid off, it changed my mentality so much that, like you said so well, like if I'm gonna go down, I'm gonna go down like with my sleeves rolled up, me working my butt off and seeing how far I can get, because I don't want to do it any other way.
Well, I think one of the big things that people fail to understand about entrepreneurship is this quote that I love, that individual entrepreneurs, uh, entrepreneurial efforts often fail, but individual entrepreneurs over their career rarely fail. Meaning, like, if you start this business and it does fail, you don't just go, all right, well, never ever going to do that again. Like, usually you're like, that makes sense actually that failed. Like, that actually adds up at this point in time, that this business, I understand now, like, okay, it wasn't the right product, wasn't the right pricing. I wasn't the right person for I was trying to do something that wasn't right for me. I needed way more capital to start this business than I thought I did. So then you go, yeah, but I learned all these things and now I'm able to actually go out into the next industry. So people get super, super focused on like their first business. It's got to be perfect. The idea has to be like earth shattering. And if it's not earth shattering, like I should not start this business. I'm like, no, actually, like you should start as small as you possibly can. Like start like a tree cutting business, like a lawn care business, like a stump grinding business, like just anything. That's going to at least get your brain turning into this new way that it sounds like your brain was already sort of turning that way. It just needed that little spark. And once you do that, then you go, oh, I'm actually playing. I'm actually in the game. Like it's kind of like, everybody thinks they can fight until they actually get into a fight. It's like, okay, now you're in the fight. Like now you're going to have to learn some stuff. Now you're okay. And now everything that I thought I knew about this is a little different. I'm not as good at it as I thought I was going to be, but that's okay. I'm actually learning the skills now and I'm out here and I'm, live to fight another day. And then maybe someday you'll get good at it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that Mike Tyson quote. Everybody has a plan, so they get punched in the face, and then you have to realize that you have to adjust. But yeah, that's exactly what happened. I got punched in the face a couple of times, and it made me kind of realize a little bit more of who you are. Like a lot of times, those challenges are what kind of show you who you are, and we don't want to go through them. We want to just be successful by snapping our fingers and going.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
in reality, if you can fail and you can take um I guess, small risk and learn, then that's going to be the best way. And I feel like that's been something that's been, to my advantage.
Well, you hit it on the head that everyone wants the success to be like snap of a finger super fast. This is like the joke in our business that if somebody says this, we're like, "Oh, okay, you're not really like ready for this." But we had someone come on. They're not bad guys, and I think their business is doing okay at this point in time, but they were in like a sales meeting with us and we're essentially pitching our services, but the companies are also pitching back to us like, hey,
Right.
do you want to partner on this? And they're like, yeah, we love this brand. They did $1 million in their first year. It's called Liquid Death. And I'm like, okay, well, the CEO of that company was also the former chief marketing officer of Netflix. Like they have know-how, they have resources,
Yeah.
they have like, a
Connection.
compelling story. Like that's the one in the million like chance. It's survivor bias. You hear about all these companies like Snapchat. You're like, dude, in 3 years they were billionaires. And I'm like, results not typical. All right. You don't see the literally like 1 million companies that attempted to do that and that didn't succeed. You hear about them because it's an anomaly, not
Right.
because that's like the typical. That's like saying like as a 6-year-old kid, you're like, I want to be LeBron James. You're like, unlikely, Gresham. Unlikely. Like, but you can't say that as an adult, right? You can't be like, probably not going to happen. Actually, it's almost an impossibility that this happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's like, okay, well, you're talking about the best player in the world. Like, dude, like go play in college. That would be amazing if you could get there,
Right.
right? But
Yeah. But
fortunately, business is a long term game. You can just keep playing.
Yeah, but you know what's so funny? I'm glad you brought up that part about the liquid death and who the CEO is, because I think even for those people that are like 1 in a billion that happens to, they still have stories of things that they've done to reach that level, and it's like
Right.
people just think that they just wake up in this osmosis and they become successful, but there are sacrifices, there are things like that's why one of the books I love is Outliers with Malcolm Gladwell. Not necessarily, I think there's certain people that feel certain ways about like the actual 10,000 hours you put in,
Yeah.
but I think the whole entire concept of it is that what you see is not happening because people just snap their fingers. They put in periods of time, they had luck, they had all these things that worked out for them so that they can get to the level of being that successful. And I think when we start to like really understand that, then I think people will, first of all, I think they'll take the steps towards, starting things, but I think they also will not be so discouraged when things don't go the way that they want them to go.
Right. And people have this weird view of business that like I'm smart, I'll be good at it. And it's like
Yeah.
this is not like an IQ test. It's actually not. Like I know a lot of people who I'm like, this person's not very clever, but somehow this business is working.
Right.
Not my clients, obviously. Uh, but to that point, like if you can just get in and practice, that's the most important thing. It's even like athleticism. Like sometimes you'll see somebody who's like very naturally athletic. You're like, oh, they're gonna be amazing. But it's like this kid over here on the side who like doesn't really look the part, but if they just keep at it and keep
Right.
going, that person who's like super athletic, they may just not turn out to be what we all assume. I mean, look, that's why they have an NFL draft and people don't get picked and then they become 15-year veterans. Like
Exactly.
that story happens a lot.
Yeah.
Gresham, talk to me about the podcast and CB Nation, man. What are you trying to accomplish with those two things?
Yeah, I mean, my really big goal is to help increase the business success rate, and we try to do that through content. We do that a lot of times through sometimes interview based content in many different ways. So we have everything from like roundup posts where we'll ask questions, everything from why did you start your business to why did you decide to franchise your business to what are the best ways that you leverage social media and just all these questions that again trying to stand on the shoulders of giants of people that are actually doing it. And one of the things that I noticed when I looked at things from a journalistic standpoint is
Mm,
that I feel like entrepreneurs and business owners are superheroes. I've always felt at home ever since I was doing the freelance writing, of talking with somebody that was starting the business. I'm like, this is so awesome. I don't care if you were, a trash business or you were creating the latest widget. Like I always have felt at home, like having these conversations. So my job was really just to say, how can I best highlight these superheroes, I call them, in the world and everything that they're doing, and how can I also learn from them? Like I always joke, Alex, that I'm that annoying kid in the class that was always raising their hand and saying like, how'd you do this, how'd you do that? So that's me, and I just happen to do this now on blogs and podcasts. But what's really what we're hoping to do, open to launch, like, different things around helping to make that easier for people to find content and information. So everything from like starting to break down a lot of the different lessons that I've heard and that I've gotten from like the 1600 podcast episodes I've done, like rather than having to go through and literally listen to every single episode, you can start to figure out what might be something that can help you out related to operations and business. Or if you want to know more about marketing, you could find this here. So that's what I'm really working on now, is starting to like organize it in a way that is more accessible to people, still a little bit more like on demand. I but be able to kind of help people to find what they're looking for as quickly as possible. So that's kind of like where we're trying to like evolve into, but it's still, telling the stories at the heart of it. It's like one of the best things that I think I've taken from the podcast and the blog, especially, but probably more the podcast, is that you can feel isolated along the entrepreneurial journey. You could feel like you're doing it wrong. You could feel like you're a failure as soon as you just had your best win. And that's just part of like that journey. But I think when you start to hear people's stories, when you start to talk with people, when you start to realize that, hey, this client isn't what I thought he or she would be, whatever that is, you feel that you're not doing it wrong. You don't feel as much by yourself. And I think more than anything else for the podcast, that's what I've gotten. And that's what I love hearing the stories, because you realize that people don't have that straight path. I always say like success is much more like a plate of spaghetti than that straight linear path that we think. So when you start hearing that, you realize that, hey, I'm not doing it wrong. Hey, I'm not a failure. Hey, I'm not terrible. I don't suck. I'm not, made. All these things we can tell ourselves are not necessarily true. So when you start to put that out there, and I think that's what really I've gotten more than anything else from the podcast.
To me, I think I could sum that up in one word, and it sounds like a superpower of yours is curiosity. Like, and that to me is going to probably be like, if I was going to make a prediction over the next 5 to 10 years, that's going to be a word and a trait that becomes like super popular. Because I'm sure, and one of my questions is like some of the lessons that you've picked up from these 1600 episodes, some of which obviously solo, but a lot of them with guests, is that curiosity, both in terms of, well, how does this work? Like, does it work the way that I think that it works? And could I actually innovate in this industry? Or when you're communicating with people, like just the simplest things, like just literally yesterday when I was on the podcast, my guest, he goes, whenever I'm having like a conversation that I think might be kind of hard, he's like, I just use this phrase. I'm curious. I'm curious if I understand. And that's just like such a good one, because like you might say something to me that I'm like, don't agree with that. And, or like, maybe you're wrong and I need to like correct you. That's a really difficult skill as a leader, is like correction, direction giving. So you just go, I'm curious, like how, like you thought about this problem. And then usually people will just kind of like slowly answer the questions that you're looking for. And I think you've clearly utilized that in journalism.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that word, curiosity. I'm fascinated by people, and I'm fascinated by their stories. I'm even more fascinated around like how people think. How do you come, like you said, like
Mm.
how do you come to this conclusion? Like, what are you thinking about? Like, even my son, I'll ask him, like, what were you thinking about when you did this? Not so much that you're trying to say this is wrong, but just so that you can maybe understand. Because I feel like that has been one of my kind of advantages, for better or worse at times, is that I do try to really understand, empathize, whatever the word might be, from somebody else's perspective, because I feel like that helps me be a little bit more well-rounded, I guess you can say, or have different perspective on different things. And I think that's been, something that has come out during the podcast and come out with a lot of the things that I've done.
Yeah, I talked about this last night, but it's sort of that thought that you're always right. It's that internal dialogue. Joke is that when you're on the highway, everybody who's going slower than you is an idiot, and everybody going faster than you is an absolute maniac. It's like, I'm right in this situation. Clearly, I'm the one who's in the right. So just being able to like disconnect yourself from that. And I do like HR and performance appraisals for my employees, and every employee thinks that they're the best employee at the company, and everyone else around them is like really dropping the ball. And
Exactly.
it's and
Mailing it in.
when you talk to every employee and they all think that, you're like, oh, this is just like the
Human
default
nature.
mode of everyone. Yeah. Even sometimes, like, no disrespect, but like sometimes the worst employee. We had an instance where this guy, it was like a quantifiable thing. We just have like a pace you have to keep in the warehouse. Just like, you can't be the slowest person in the warehouse. And he was the slowest person in the warehouse. And we like brought him in and we had data to support our argument that, like, hey, brother, like, you're not moving at the same pace as everyone. He had like a back injury. We're like, is the back injury affecting you? He's like, I'm the fastest person out there. Like, you put me next to anybody, and I'll beat them. And I'm like, we literally have data to tell you that this is not accurate. So it's just like, even in the face of like the answer right in front of you, you can still mentally like define yourself in the way that you want to, and that's difficult. That's a difficulty in seeing other people. So
Yeah.
talk to me about those 1600 episodes. What are the things that right at the top of your mind you think these are reoccurring themes that successful people seem to articulate to me?
Yeah, absolutely. Funny enough, I broke down, a lot of these things into the 16 topics or so I have like right over my shoulder and some of those things. But
Mm,
one of the probably biggest things that I take away, and this is a lot of these things are not anything that we haven't heard before. It's just sometimes when you hear it over and over again, you're like, okay, this is the thing. And the biggest one that I think came out consistently is the morning routines.
interesting.
So yeah, I ask everybody on the show for, I call it a CEO hack, which is like an app, a book, or a habit, but something you lean on that makes you more effective and efficient. And that has been the thing that has come up the most. Like that morning routine, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to wake up at a certain time. Doesn't mean you have
5 a.m., cold
to,
plunge, you
yeah.
gotta have your morning coffee, do your meditation. That's like, unfortunately, that's like what I think of when I hear morning routine. I'm like, is this real? Are you actually doing this?
Well, and I think that's the thing about like I've learned on the podcast. It doesn't have to necessarily be that. And I feel like if you're in even times when I first heard about the morning routine, it's like, okay, if I'm not waking up at 4 a.m., I'm not doing it right. But in reality, your morning routine can be whatever it is. And often when you're so busy, especially entrepreneurs and CEOs, I always say we're part-time firefighters. We're putting out all these fires, have to do all these things. As soon as the clock strikes a certain number, and it could be 10 o'clock, 8 a.m., whatever it is. So you try to get ahead of that by kind of getting yourself in a space where you can either check off the things that you need to. You can do deep thinking. You can do the cold plunge if you want. You can walk the dog, eat breakfast, whatever it is that is going to be your thing. I think the consistency in doing that helps you to get ahead of the day.
Mm,
So that's been like kind of one of the big things that has come up consistently. Another big one is understanding the human part of business. And the
mm,
reason I bring that up is because we often can see things like technology, data, AI, just all these things that are happening that we can look at the world and especially business in silos that we forget about that human element. And even if you look at, I think, a lot of people have said related to AI and things like that, that people are saying are going to completely take jobs away and do all those things. I think if we start to look at how these things can serve the human nature, can serve humanity and all the things that we're trying to do, we don't think either or, we think both and better. And how can you reinvent that in a different and unique way? So those are two of the like, quick things that kind of come, but obviously, talk with a lot of people. So there's more and more things that can kind of, come up related to like what you can learn from. But I think the biggest thing is that, there's so much to be learned and there's so much knowledge that you hear consistently over and over again.
I think the people side of the business is something that I hear over and over and over again, and that can take you in so many different directions, right?
Yes.
It's empathy, it's like taking care of your people, it's like learning how to communicate and have difficult conversations, it's like learning how to fire, learning how to hire, getting the correct people. Here's a big one that people really struggle with as entrepreneurs, like learning how to delegate the things that you're doing to other individuals. I think that one thing to really start your business journey with is the idea in mind that if you want to work alone or with just a small group of people, or are you comfortable with the idea of having 10, 15, 20, 50? Like we have 37 now, which feels crazy because like a year ago we had like 25, and then a year before that we had like 15, and a year before that we had like 7. So it's like you blink and 7 went to 37, and you're like, next year we might have 50. And now we've got like all these new rules because we're not considered like a small business in some different legislation. But I think we didn't necessarily start this business with the idea that like, yeah, we want to have 50 employees. We just said to ourselves, like, we want to make more money.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does that mean? Like, well, maybe that means that you need more employees. And I don't know if your businesses have like hard employees, or if you have some people who just like kind of freelance with you. I saw you had something on your site about virtual assistants. I want to ask you about that because that's a topic that keeps coming up over and over again. But if you're not a people person and you do not want to bring like a bunch of people into your business that you want to manage, then I think you just need to mentally like make that decision and then start to align your business like that. Like I've had more than one person that I've worked with who's just like, "Oh, I don't like all these people in the business and I don't like dealing with that." And I'm like, "Well, this is like a side effect of growth in our industry." Like maybe like your podcast can stay at like 3 or 4 people and you can like, crush it and make $10 million a year. But I don't think there's that many businesses like that. So if you don't want to work on those like personal emotional development skills, like that's cool. You're not a bad person. It's just you have to actually like align that in your business, or else you're going to be like a maniacal owner that like doesn't want to work with his people and doesn't want to adapt. And it's like never going to change the way that he does things because he has it all figured out.
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely true, and it's so funny. That's one of the reasons I named it the IMCO podcast is because my goal was really to have different quote unquote CEOs on the show, different sizes, different stages, and I think you're absolutely right. Where I think the biggest thing is you have to have that honest conversation around what you hope to do. What does success look like? Where are you trying to go? What does being a CEO mean to you? Which is what I ask everybody, because it can mean many different things. And if you are that person that says, hey, I just want to have, you know, a 6-figure business or a 7-figure business, and I don't want many employees, I don't want any employees, and whatever that looks like, then you get to kind of figure out how best you can have that aligned. And I think that probably at no other time, as much as now, have you been able to have the opportunity to do that where you see influencers and people that partner with other people. And actually on I had my IMCO podcast, but I have another podcast that I had started before called CEO Chat, and one of the guests I had on the show wrote a book around having a one-person $1 million business, and
Mm.
a lot of that planted the seeds for the IMCO podcast. It's because there's a growing trend and growing number of people that don't have a lot of employees and are still really raking it in. And sometimes they're doing that by having freelancers. Sometimes they're doing that by partnering with organizations. So rather than have like a marketing person, they're having an agency, or rather than having an accounting person that's on staff, they're actually having a actual organization or a CMO or a CFO or a fractional, whatever that might be. They're figuring out partnerships essentially on how to build out and grow their business. So it's interesting and fascinating because you're starting to see a lot of businesses that have this is our core of what we do, and this is what we're best at, and we're going to try to be the best at that thing, our superpower, our genius. And then the other things we're either going to farm out, we're going to partner, we're going to do something so that we can spend as much time as possible and stay as lean as possible. So I feel like that's growing and happening more and more and more. But honestly, it goes back to, like you said so well, like what is your vision? What do you hope to do? And then you start to kind of, chart that out from there.
Yeah, start with the end in mind. I think
Yeah.
a lifestyle business. That sounds great. I mean, make $1 million a year. I can work remote. I can go spend some time in Thailand if I want. Like just, well, we got 37 employees. We just like went, you know, back assward into it and we found ourselves here. So it is what it is. But to your point about just that personal growth journey, I think the emotional side for those CEOs out there is really probably the most difficult one. I just recently heard that business is just a personal growth endeavor masquerading as a capitalistic pursuit. And I'm like,
That's
oh,
for sure.
that's like me. But some people like you want to be a capitalist, but you're like personal growth. That's like not my thing. So again, you just have to be honest with yourself. If that's not your thing, then that's cool. You're not a bad person, but you probably don't want to try to have 50 employees. And something that I try to tell like all the business owners that I meet, especially as they're like kind of like ascending up, is that the skills that you have when you start the business are the absolute wrong skills that you need while you're growing the business. Like to start the business, you need to be like a maniac who takes control of everything. You need to work 12, 15, 16 hours a day. You need to like hammer down on the things that you're good at and what's working and not let anyone else get in the way of that and make sure everything's done perfectly the way that you want it. But as you get to like 10, 12, 20, 30 people, like you can't run the business like that. And honestly, whenever you hear about people like my boss is a maniac or my CEO is crazy or like he just won't let us do anything, that's the like ailment that that person has is they are still running the business like it's three people. And that's hard because you have to give up what worked. This thing worked. It actually was a positive thing for your business. You got positive feedback when you did this. Now you're like, it's still going to work, but no, it's not. It's actually causing toxicity in your workplace. So that's a tough one to get over.
Yeah, that's a huge thing, and that's why I said like that human part of business is such a big thing because we think so often it's about HR and bringing on hiring people, but it's literally every aspect of the business. Whether you're trying to market to someone, their human part's there because you're trying to develop that connection and that communication. But even you as a leader, you have to understand that human part. Understand like sometimes the whole psychology of like what you're maybe afraid to let go might be deeply ingrained in who you are as an individual or what took you to kind of what it took you to kind of get to where you are. And it's so funny like I'm literally we're going through and implementing EOS within the business and I'm the only employee but we have a team of contractors like, as you were asking about. And one of the things that's really hard is letting go of what got you to where you are. And one of the things that I try to visualize and remind myself on the daily basis is I heard this business coach say that if you envision yourself kind of being like a kid on a jungle gym, every time you try to swing from one rung to the other, you have to let go of the previous rung or you're just stuck.
Mm,
And if you
mm.
don't let go of that previous rung, you're literally going to be just hanging there like a crazy person.
I love that.
And yeah, it's such a huge thing. So what served you before to get to that next rung is not going to serve you to get to the rung after that. So I always try to like work on that and visualize that. But it is extremely hard because again, you especially if you've been like a founder and you've seen it literally from an idea from inception to where it is now, that's the whole human part. Like how and where do you want the business to go? What do you want it to look like? And what are you going to let go of to get to that next level and what that looks like? Or you might be okay just, hanging on the rung and just staying there and just chilling out. So whatever might work best for you.
Mm. So we talked a little bit about virtual assistants. I saw that in the CEO hacks catalog. I want to hear about some other quick hacks, but talk to me about where you see virtual assistants because that's something I've been thinking a lot about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of people saw, during the pandemic is that, sometimes your best workforce isn't necessarily right outside of your door. And I think when you start to be able to look more and more and more across the US, across the world, and in different states and countries and so on and so forth, you get to see that there are different opportunities that you can kind of leverage. And I think as we start to see the world being, less siloed, less, we only buy from our country, we only do these things and that things, we're going to start leveraging other countries. And I think one of the biggest things that you can do is get those perspectives. Sometimes even for us, like we do a lot of like website support and things like that, just having more of a 365 kind of operation where we're available if things go down, things like that. It became a lot more advantageous to have people in different countries. But I think one of the biggest things and one of the things that and it goes back to that curiosity is I always want to try to be as well-rounded and at least have the people around me understand things and look at things from a different perspective. And sometimes you get that by having people from different countries. Sometimes you get that from having people with different experiences at different stages in their lives. So that's been something huge for me. I mean, we're a virtual business, like literally everything we do is virtual. So it's been a little bit easier for us than maybe other people. Like if you're building a house, maybe you don't want somebody in a completely different country to make that happen. But it depends on your business, on your stage, what you're trying to do, and your vision. But it's been a huge thing for us, and being able to kind of see people that you bring on and see them grow and see those kind of goals happen.
It's funny you say that because I met a contractor who also owned a virtual assistant business. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I have VAs do everything. They do all the invoicing, they like send all the purchase orders." I was like, "Dude, I've worked in construction and that sounds crazy to me." Yeah, I'm getting closer to it. Just to probably like start. Like I talked about it on this podcast before, but I am reading Dan Martell's book, Buy Back Your Time, and I just listened to a podcast with him, and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm obsessed. So just potentially starting with something even easy like email, like maybe having someone like sort through my email, and then trying to take all these like little small tasks that I do. I mean, even something as simple as like I go in and I create the link for you and I send you an email with it. It's like Alex doesn't need to do that. But it does take a certain level of getting over yourself, right? Like you're like, this is ridiculous. I could send the email. And I get so annoyed when people are like, schedule a time to meet with me with my assistant. I was like, dude, you are not that busy. Like, I know you're not that busy. So I don't know if I want to be that guy, but I'm getting a lot closer to it.
Yeah, and I think that's the best way. Like anytime I mention to somebody, I always say, you bring somebody on before you need them. And a lot of times when you do that, you can test them out with a small task. You can see how those things work. One thing I will say is that probably very similar to, hiring people everywhere. Like you don't always get the right person, but in this virtual world, you can minimize your risk by bringing somebody on that may potentially just send a link, or do something small, and you can kind of test them out and see like how they're going to improve and continue to kind of increase hours, opportunity, or responsibility, and things like that. But I think that's usually what I've seen is the best way to do it, because you don't always know, and sometimes there are even people that are on the team that may have 100 different clients, and they're literally just you know jumping on and getting more and more people and not actually doing the work. So you get to kind of
Mm.
filter a lot through that by having those small, minimal, low impact tasks that you can kind of test them out with.
Yeah, and one of the things that Dan Martell was talking about is just like systematizing what you actually are doing, like putting trainings on it. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that's so good. Because he was talking about people like kind of complaining to him, like, gosh, my team they're just not doing it the way that I want. And he's like, okay, like show me the training for them. And they're like, well, we don't have like a formal training for them. And it's like, okay, well, show me the standard that they're supposed to hit. And it's like, yeah, we don't have like a formal standard. It was just like not good enough. And he's like, so this person has no standard. They have no knowledge of what they're in charge of. And then they have no training that they were given formally that they can go back and reference. They're like, yeah, that's right. And it's like, that's not their fault. That's your fault. And I was like, oh. So I think just putting those guardrails in place might help, but I don't think that I need them to be public facing. That rubs me a little bit the wrong way. I'll just be honest. I don't think it's your makes you a bad person. It's just something different for me. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a different world. And I completely can kind of understand that. I think the biggest thing is just like having that transparency and being like honest about it is probably the biggest thing more than anything else. Cause of course people can make their decisions, but it's so funny. I just had a podcast today, and one of the people was really big into operations. He talked exactly around that. What you just said, like resonated so much, where you can literally create operations and processes around anything within your business. And I think it makes your business more of a business in order to do that. But, a lot of times we have really great ideas. We want to really go for it. We're really trying to build these things that we don't remember how to create those systems, or we don't even know how to do that. And a lot of times, whether we're talking about culture or hiring somebody, or if there's an issue within an organization, none of these systems are created. So it's like, how are we creating that expectation for people to really excel and grow? So it's a huge thing.
the word you just said is expectation. And I see this a lot in my business and probably in other businesses. There's these unsaid expectations out there that people don't meet, and then other people get frustrated. So there's this unset expectation out there, or maybe it's not a standard at the business, but it's like we all kind of do it this way. It's like we all BCC each other on like the brand reports every month.
Yeah.
And then there's one person who doesn't do it, and you're like, hmm, or like, what? Why don't they do it? Do I need to say something to them? And it's like, well, they're not breaking a rule. There's no rule in place, but it is sort of like our way that we do it. And then it creates this like weird like animosity that like this person's not including me on their brand. But like at the end of the day, that's sort of on you as the business owner. Like if that's how you feel, you need to set it as the standard. You need to set the expectation that, hey, we do this every single time. Then at least once it's set, if the person doesn't do it, you can go, hey, like, bump, bump. Remember we have this standard that we do, that we attach all the other brand reps on. Oh yeah. Sorry. Like I just forgot. Or maybe they go, yeah, I don't actually want to do that. Then it's like, we can have a conversation about why you don't want to do that now. But until you actually set the expectation, I just see that creating resentment in the future because, and this is one of the biggest ones that I hate. People go, I shouldn't have to tell Gresham that, he should know. And I'm
Right.
like, why should Gresham know?
Right.
It's obvious. Like, well, it's not obvious to Gresham because he's not doing it. Like, so I don't know if Gresham's just dull and he like can't pick up on the subtleties. I just like when people are like, oh, you got to read the room. I'm like, look, that is your room. Like that is not my room necessarily. Like we have different rooms. Like it's that theory of mind thing. Like everybody's driving way faster than me. They're a maniac, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
I saw this quote from you that you are a media company. What does that mean to you?
So it basically means that there's so many different ways that you can kind of get your name and information out there. I compare media, and I have a very broad definition of it. Is really anything that you're doing to kind of take information from yourself, from your organization, and present it to somebody else. And that could be literally a one-on-one conversation. It could be handing a pamphlet. It could be social media. It could be different ingredients, I call them, within marketing. So I really feel like everybody is in the media business, whether you know it or not, because at the heart of what we're trying to do is really get our name, our brand, what it is that we do into more and more people. And I even go beyond business to say, even if you are the mom that wants a stop sign on the corner because everybody's zooming past, you might create some type of petition that goes to everybody that's in the neighborhood to sign so that that can happen. And I consider that building your own media company. It's basically just understanding that, and I always compare it to like going to the grocery store to figure out what ingredients you need for the dish you're trying to make. Where are you trying to go? What does success look like? And you work backwards from there. You reverse engineer to figure out this is what I want success to look like. These are going to be the integral ingredients, whether it be social media, whether it is flyers, or maybe it is going to networking events or whatever it might be that's going to make that happen. And I think that's where I start to look at being a media company, and how you can leverage these things in the right recipe, in the right way, and execute it in the best way so that you can try to reach that goal.
Yeah, I found this out uh, a couple of maybe probably a year ago. We had a candidate for one of the parties, the Libertarian Party is what it was.
Mhm.
Candidate for president come on, and he said something that just went like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But he said, like, yeah, I have like one of the bigger media presences, so like they should pick me. And I was like, oh, interesting. But it made total sense, right? Like to be president or even just the candidate, because look, the Libertarian Party is not going to win, but just to be the candidate, it wasn't really about like having the best ideas. It was actually about like media presence, which I think you've seen that with like Donald Trump. You can just like get media. And I started to think about it and I was like, yeah, really to like get things done, like get the thing done you want. It just like you talked about with the sign on the corner of the street. It's like you have to have some sort of a media presence. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not quite sure necessarily, because you would hope that like the best ideas can win out, but that's not necessarily even real. Like the person with the biggest media presence can sometimes like win the argument. Like imagine if like me, or like wanted to get into like a verbal fight with Elon, and like imagine if he actually wants to like clap back. It's like he's going to win regardless of if he's right. If you're like, hey, like, humans have walked on Jupiter, and or he says that, like, you can't be like, no, you're wrong, because he'll have like millions of people who chime in on Twitter, and they're like, no, he's right. Look at all this evidence, and you're like, there's no way I can win this argument actually. Or something even worse, like imagine like you get canceled. I'm doing the air quotes here, like you don't have a big enough media presence to actually like speak up and be able to defend yourself if potentially like there's like a bigger media outlet over there. Like if one of the big media outlets wants to come for you, like, you know, that's a tank running over a soldier, right? Like you can't do anything about that. And that's a little bit frightening, but I also think it was eye-opening for me that I'm like, oh, like I have to make this like I don't like social media. Like I have to make this podcast go. I got to put out the effort. I got to make this thing be a platform where I can get my ideas out.
Yeah. Well, and what I think is interesting is that I think that that's gradually starting to change because the
Mm,
gift or curse is that everybody does have an opportunity to have their voice to be heard. So
yep.
everybody does have their own media company, which is the whole idea. And I think what used to happen is that there were three TV shows, news shows that you watch, and that's where you got all of your information. So I think that, of course, like your people that have 1.2 million followers are going to have more weight than somebody that might have 10 followers. But what I think starting to happen is it's starting to be more of I don't want to say it's a level playing field because I think you still have these big, huge tech companies that control the algorithms, that control, so much of what's happening. But I think that you're starting to see that people have more of a voice than they did before. And I don't know if you're a big sports fan, but um, Kevin Durant, he's someone that will literally spar with somebody that has 10 followers.
Yeah.
He'll literally go back at them and say all those things, and people are like, "Why are you even doing that?" But I think that is where we are in today, where people can have those conversations, and that person that does have 10 followers can actually have that conversation with Elon or Kevin Durant or whoever it might be, and that never, never, ever would have happened. 10, 20 years ago. But I think we're starting to see that for better or worse, people do have that opportunity. So I think it's for people that have that know-how, that have that strong mission, that really, believe in the things. And I ultimately feel like it's for the betterment of the world. But I know everybody doesn't always think that you do understand that you do leverage this media for good, for the betterment of the world. Because if you do that, if you understand that, then it's only going to help the world to be a better place. But for better or worse, everybody to some degree has the same tools. They don't necessarily have the know-how. They may not necessarily have the budget and the money, but they still have those tools. And a lot of it is honestly right in our pocket.
Yeah. The apt analogy is probably like, yeah, it's still a democracy. Billionaires can donate to the campaigns, but it is still a democracy, right?
Exactly.
Like, but you do see people get pulled out of obscurity. I mean, look at the Hawktua girl, like,
Right.
or,
Exactly.
look at the guy, the cranberry juice guy, Fleetwood Mac. Like sometimes that just happens. I mean,
Right.
but to your point, if you can actually build that media platform and presence over time, which is I think what you and I are attempting to do,
Right.
because we can only help as many people as we actually reach. And it is this like counterintuitive thing that you got to like put yourself out there and be kind of like not a pushy salesperson, but you got to like push yourself out
Functionary.
there. It'd be great if like the algorithm just picked us up and we got fired out there, but there's a lot of people who are attempting to do that, and a lot of people who are really smart and capable. And then you get into a little bit of like imposter syndrome, where you're like, geez, like, well, gosh, like, why would anyone listen to Alex? Like, Dan Martell is just like giving such great information out there. Like, I've only done 150 million in sales. This guy's done a billion or 10 million or 100 billion. But I think you just got to do your best and put out good content. Um,
Yeah.
Talk to me about advice you'd have for my podcast. You've got 1,600 episodes under your belt. You're doing daily episodes, man, which is just absolute madness. I think you recorded a couple today. So as a media, kind of put your media hat on, how do you think about your podcast, my podcast, any podcast that wanted to continue to get their message out?
Yeah, I mean, I think podcasting is a phenomenal, platform and opportunity, ingredient, even, that you can use to kind of reach as many people as possible. I think one of the things that you mentioned, Joe Rogan, I think most people, when they get into podcasting, they're automatically like, I want to be Joe Rogan. And I think
Yeah.
that I think that that is, I don't want to say setting yourself up for failure, but I think it's a lot of what we talked about where sometimes if you're not looking at, I don't want to say realistically, I hate that word, but if you're not really
You could
understanding.
become Joe Rogan. Like, let's just say you could. Like, who am I to say that you could not ever become that? Just like you could become LeBron James.
Mhm.
You probably won't, but like, hey, don't. How's the old quote go? Like, shoot for the stars, you'll still land on the moon. Hey, aim high, buddy.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that by you trying to be Joe Rogan, by you trying to be LeBron, you're kind of not allowing the world to see who you are. And I think
Mm,
that's the beautiful part is like we are all are individual. We all have our different individual gifts. We have our passions, our missions, our talents, just all those things. So by you trying to emulate somebody else, you're automatically saying that I'm not enough, that you can't be that person. So I think the quote is "Be yourself" because everybody else is already taken, and
mm,
it's so important to kind of do that. So I think podcasting is a phenomenal platform to do that, and I think a lot of it goes back to where you're trying to go. Like if it's a daily podcast, one of the reasons I started doing a daily podcast is because I did a lot of networking. I connected with a lot of people even before the pandemic. I used to go to networking events. I was on boards and all these things, and I was getting tired and burnt out, honestly. So I took a step back and said, okay, how can I really do this from my superpowers, do it in like a consistent way so that I can make that impact, connect with people and do things from that standpoint. And that's where that podcast came from. But I love like everything that you're doing. And I think that it gets to the heart, I think truly of, and I don't even do this on my podcast as much for the daily one is having just conversations because you never know what will come out from those conversations. And I think just literally holding space for somebody to talk about their story, their journey, having a great back and forth is really one of the most beautiful things I think about podcasting and just hitting the record button and doing that. So I think you have to really figure out like, what do you want to accomplish? What does that look like? Because there's many different people that you quote unquote can emulate, but I don't say you should emulate them. You should maybe pattern yourself if you feel like that's a great fit, but you should take the best of what you think is going to help support you to get to that goal. So that's the biggest thing about podcasting. But of course, it's if you are thinking about starting a podcast, most people don't make it past episode 12. They don't even really
mhm,
make it past episode 3.
mhm.
So the consistency is going to be the biggest thing. So if you are thinking about podcasts, I encourage you to maybe be on a set of podcasts, talk with people that
Mm,
have podcasts. I say, like, of course, you can build your own media company. The next best thing is being on somebody else's media company.
mhm,
So join somebody else's podcast, do all those things because that's going to give you a little bit more of a taste on what it looks like. Because as you know, Alex, there's a lot that is involved outside of just hitting the record button and just asking the questions. There's so much that are involved, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. Um, One other quick thing, and that's what I love that you've done, is I think the best way to create a podcast is if you have a business already.
mm,
If you have something that you can either create an opportunity for you to have that authority positioning where you're known as an expert because of something, or you can even use it as a way to connect with referral partners, people that can refer you to your business. You can talk with clients and customers just to highlight some of the things that you're doing, or you can use it to network. But just know that it's a medium that you can use it in so many different ways. But if you have a business already, what it's going to do is be able to sustain this as a marketing channel, as a marketing opportunity more than anything else. So I think those are sometimes the biggest things that I've, taken away from podcasting. But yeah, I think it's a phenomenal opportunity, but it's
not
not
to
for
mention,
everybody.
it's not for everybody. How many times do you hear someone go, "Yeah, I was thinking about being a surgeon's assistant, but then I went and I shadowed a surgeon assistant, and I didn't want to
Not
do
for
that
me.
anymore." It's like, that's great. It took you one day to figure out that that's not for you. I don't know how long it took you to figure out you didn't want to be in the postal service for the rest of your life, but to
it's,
keep
it's that meeting with the guy.
to stick on the topic of like longevity and keeping at it, something I heard recently, I don't even recall who I heard it from, but they just said, yeah, if I start doing something, I'll put a time limit on it and I'll say I'm not allowed to quit until this time. Like I have to do it for 2 years. And if I hate it after 2 years, like I will quit. But if you don't, like you're gonna suck at it for the first 2 months and you're gonna be like, I hate this thing. Like, why am I doing this podcast? Nobody's listening. It's a ton of work. I'm like spending all this money. And, I just listened to I heard Chris Williamson say, and it was like not one of the first episodes. It was like episode 40. He's like, we got 0 plays. And I was like, oh, like, I'm even getting a handful of plays. 0. Like, but yeah, that guy's got 2 million subscribers now. So he just stuck to it, and he just kept continuing to improve. But the other value I see in the podcasting is just I get your time. Like, you freely choose to give me an hour and a half, 2 hours of your time on a Friday night when you could just be at home with your family, but you choose to share not only your insight, but the insight of 1,600 different podcasts that you've done with hundreds of different entrepreneurs, many of which I'm sure are far ahead of mine. And fortunately, you've condensed it down for me so I don't have to go listen to every single episode. That's fantastic. Some of the coolest people I've ever talked to who would never talk to me, just like sitting down at a bar, like, hey, let me borrow you for 90 minutes and like drill into why you did get into the waste management industry and like why you're so passionate about it and why you feel the need to like start another business after you sold your last business, even though you're in your 60s. That's just so fun for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I had James Carberry. He wrote content-based networking, which I think that's one of the most underutilized ways to use the podcasting is actually networking, connecting with people, building relationships, co-creating things. All those things can happen. But I've talked, like you said so well, I've talked with people that I never would have had a chance to talk with if I had not had this podcast. But one thing that you really said that really kind of stuck with me is that I don't know if there's enough time that people put into like knowledge of self, of learning yourself and learning like what you
Mhm.
want to do and be and all of those things. So I think so many times we're very much so like I see this, I want to do that because that person did it. And we're not really understanding like where and who we are. So like when we're thinking about throwing in the towel for our podcast, are we throwing in the towel of the podcast because we don't like being a beginner at things? We don't like being at 0 views
Yeah.
and we feel embarrassed, we're uncomfortable? Or is it because maybe this isn't our thing? And I think the difficult thing is you really can only maybe answer that for yourself. And you have to be honest with yourself when you look in the mirror, because we have to realize like, if you really want to be great at podcasting, the podcasting is your thing, you have to go through those 0 downloads. You listen to
Mhm.
people, like I was listening to an interview, I think it was with Kevin Hart. He was talking about how when he used to tell his jokes, he would literally have no one sitting there while he's telling these jokes, but he continued to kind of persevere because that was his thing. So you kind of have to at least try on different things, test out different things. But when you find what that thing is, know that you shouldn't throw in the towel if that is your thing. You should keep persevering through it because that's what all the greats end up doing.
I think it was Scott Galloway because I'm remembering the other half of what he said was that the thing that you are good at, you actually generally learn to love. How
Yeah.
true is that, right? Like, if you're the best archer in the world, like, it's probably pretty fun to, like, go to an archery competition. "Oh, I just won $200,000." Like,
Yeah.
that didn't suck. You weren't like, "Oh gosh, I gotta do this thing in the wo," like, all the things I have to do. Not always, but I would say generally, when you become excellent at something, it
Yeah.
becomes
It's fine.
at minimal tolerable.
Right.
All right, I got a couple last questions. CEO hacks. You got any fast ones for us that people can potentially start to implement or even just things to stew on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my probably one biggest hack and I know we've already kind of worked through this, is your scheduling software. You can
Mm,
always do the back and forth. It sounds like it's so minimum. I think the big thing about CEO hacks is it isn't sometimes the grand thing. Sometimes it's a quote unquote small thing that ends up being huge, impactfully. Little things like being able to know that somebody else is in a different time zone and you are too. To be able to send them a link and have them book a time and you book a time and both show up at exactly the same time is an amazing thing. And I think people are getting a little bit more open to that. Um, After that, I would probably say your project management software is a really big thing as well. We talked a little bit around operations and systems and things like that.
which one do you
Especially,
like?
I use Basecamp. I've also
Okay.
used Asana. ClickUp is another really big one. These things all help you to get a lot of the things that are in your head, conversations that you're having, and have it all in one place for a team. Especially if you have like a remote team or you have team that might be working at different hours or different stages or whatever that might be. Having that all in one place is just going to make things a lot more cohesive and efficient. And those are probably the two biggest ones. But I have hundreds of hacks like on the site, so I could go on and on and on if you want me to, Alex.
I actually had someone on my podcast, a productivity coach, and she was all about Asana. She
Yeah.
was like, I do everything in Asana. She's like, me and my team, we do not email each other. I was like, whoa. We use Monday.com. It's okay. I wouldn't say that it's like game changing for us. I would say we put it in like some general ideas, but we're all in the office 9 to 5. So I'll just like literally like poke my head in my office and be like, hey, Brad. And like we'll just go walk and talk to each other, which I love doing. I totally believe, though, if you're a remote team, like you really got to have those processes dialed in. What about books? I see you got books on the list.
Yeah, one of my absolute favorite books is The One Thing. It helped me to really change the way that I look at focus. I am very much so curious. I'll use the nice word. I'm a curious person, so I'm always interested in a lot of different things. But the whole thesis of The One Thing is that what's the one thing that by doing it, everything else is easier or necessary? And the thing that I like about the
Mm.
book is if you look at the cover of the book, see at least the copy that I had, it's actually dominoes, and the dominoes successfully get larger and larger. So the idea and the concept is that as you knock over the small domino, it starts to knock over a larger domino and a larger domino and a larger domino. So sometimes we think that by focusing on the one thing, it means that you're not doing all the other things, which of course you want to say no more. But it's
Mhm.
really that you start to build momentum when you knock over and are able to focus on that one thing. And most of the time we're thinking that, hey, we're busy, we're juggling all these things, we can't just focus on one thing. But like I'll go back to the morning routine. Sometimes if you take an hour and literally will dedicate that to planning out your day, maybe that's the one thing that will literally push things over. So it doesn't have to be a huge thing. Sometimes it's the quote unquote small thing that ends up being bigger. I think in the book it talked, or maybe I listened to an interview, I think with Ty Lopez and the author. That's what kind of put me onto it. Um, I think he talked around hiring a cleaning person for your house. And while it may seem small and that's not really anything that's going to help out your business, maybe it does help you to have like a more peaceful interest into your house. You're able to think more. Your morning routine's better. So don't really think about, oh, I need to get 10,000 more sales. Sometimes it's like I need to dedicate an hour to thinking about how I'm going to do that. My CEO time, I need to add that in, and that's actually going to be that small domino that knocks over those bigger dominoes.
Yeah, I think we all kind of do this where we have so much work to do. So what do we actually do? It's like kind of the easy stuff, right? It's like
Exactly.
I'm gonna respond to some emails. I'm gonna like go in and like I'm gonna check on the bank accounts, and I'm gonna do like all these things. When you know there's this thing behind you, like I have to go hire like a head salesperson. Like that is the thing that actually drives us forward.
Right.
Um,
To
and
eat
if
that
you
frog.
you just go, hey, like forget about all those other things. Those would be nice, but let like I have to sit down and do this thing today. I get it. I haven't read that book. I just bought it. It's on my way. It's on the way to the house. So that one will be fascinating for me. All right. Final question, man. What does being a CEO mean to you?
Being a CEO is all around understanding that the impact that you can make can be large, but it a lot of times begins with who you are and where you want to
Mm.
go. So you have to answer that question first for yourself, and then you start to kind of reverse engineer or write that script on what that's going to look like. But that includes having the vision, that includes having the people. And I should even say resources. So that could be people, that could be technology, that could be all these things that can make that come to fruition. So I think being a CEO is not one set thing. It's not necessarily saying you need to have a million employees. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can only have one employee. I see it as somebody that is a change maker, somebody that's making an impact and can see and make the world a better place in the way that they see. So that's what being a CEO means to me.
Uh, Gresham, I love it, man. Where can people find you?
Absolutely. To make it even easier, I have a site called iamgresh.com. That's IAMGRESH.com that has links to the podcast, the blog, digital marketing company, all the awesome and sometimes not so awesome things that I'm working on.
Hey, you got a lot of content there for people. You got a lot of hacks. I think I saw the handbook. You got some good stuff out there for people, man. So, Gresham, fantastic conversation, brother. I really, really appreciate all the insight that you've gained over all those episodes and discussions, and hope we can keep it connected on it.
Absolutely. I appreciate you, Alex.
Thank you, man.